Hey, Jacquire, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Can everyone else hear me? My name is Diane. I work with Recording Revolution, and I'm going to be moderating the call. Just let us know in the chat. Awesome. Right, they can hear us. Okay, great. We're going to get this started. So there's two buttons. One is for the chat, and that's where you can all chat with each other and exchange socials if you want to. And then there's another button for Q&A. If you click the Q&A button, that's where you should submit your questions. And that way we can separate them out from the chat and find them easily. I'm going to be taking questions live as well as from the pre-sent in questions. I'll be mixing them up. So let's get cracking with the first question. The first question is one that was pre-sent. It's from Hoob. I like this question because it's quite motivational. He says, I have just recently been getting into producing for major label artists, and I was wondering how you deal with all the people involved versus an indie situation. I find myself gravitating towards artists and musicians because I understand them better, but labels and management obviously have a say because they pay the bills. Sometimes I feel like I'm right in the middle of all parties, and that makes it more difficult to choose direction. I'm sure you've been in this situation a few times.
And is this, yeah, it's a tricky, difficult situation. Is the question, is it looking for just advice on that situation? Is that what it is? Okay. Yes. Okay, well, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. I just want to thank everybody, say hello. Thanks for being here. Thanks for buying the course. Thanks for these great questions. I've really appreciated it, and I hope everybody's getting a lot out of it. Working with major labels and managers, I find, I mean, very personally, very candidly, it's becoming more difficult because I guess the way of the world, there's so much exposure and so many different directions to go. There's so many more things to think about. It's not just as simple as making picking some great songs, writing some great songs, picking them, making a great record, which is a little bit more the way it works in like an indie situation, because you typically don't have all those extra voices. Those extra voices, yeah, they bring a lot of. So, I mean, if an artist has a good team, it can be a really tremendous thing. And obviously having the support of a label and the structure of management and all that stuff is, is really beneficial. My advice is that, yeah, you have to pay attention to the core things that you would in an independent situation. But that, yeah, you do have to pay attention to what the handlers and the people that are financing are saying too. My advice would be to just have communicate with everyone. Make sure that you are available. You make sure that everybody realizes you're available to them, that you are going to be a good partner, that you are able to listen and hear what they have to say. But ultimately, you have to take the responsibility of taking all these bits of information. Most of it wants to have the same outcome, but you'll hear from a label. They sometimes they want you to push the artist and challenge the artist and do things that they are either afraid to address or don't know how to address, or they don't know the answers to. So you get put in a pretty difficult is not necessarily the right word all the time, but there's many things to consider. So if you're on the front end, if you're having communication with everybody, or at least make sure that everybody knows that you're available to communicate and that you hear out what everyone has to say, and then you have to make decisions. As the producer, the person in the middle, you really are the person in the middle. You have to make judgment calls of how you factor in all those different opinions. And what are valuable, what you agree with, what you don't agree with, and the things you don't agree with, you just sort of have to gracefully, maybe not tell the manager or the A&R person, I don't agree with you, but maybe just say, just kind of understand what they're saying, and maybe just don't execute what their request is, but consider it when you're doing the work, because obviously you have to feel empowered as a creator, and decision maker, and a partner to the artist and making the record. You have to make the record that you believe in, but you want to be aware of the things that you might be leaving out, and what the repercussion of your decisions will be. And I can say from past experience that the more people that are involved, the chances of it going successfully beginning to end become not as great. It's much easier to make a record with an artist, and they just come to you. You guys are in the studio, you finish it together, and then it just goes from there. When you have all these other voices, you have to send references to the label and the managers, and people come and visit, and they want to listen and they want to have input. So it becomes more complicated. But that's the nature of it, and that's what you have to deal with. But at the end of the day, you have to make the record that you believe in. And also from personal experience, in doing that, you may not create something that the label or management deems worthy of the effort, and that they may not put it out. I'm actually in a situation right now where I'm kind of navigating a very similar situation. I'm not going to name names or share any of it, but it's frustrating and it's difficult, and you just have to understand that that's the reality of it, and just try to handle it with grace. I know I'm kind of saying the same things over and over again, but there isn't really an answer. You just have to be the best partner in it, and do what you believe in, and stand behind that, and accept that it's not always going to work out. In the same way that you might make only independent records. Some of those go on to have some sort of success, and some just don't see the light of day. And so, it's just the nature of things. Listen, I'm known for probably, I would say collectively, there are maybe a dozen or more or so albums that people generally talk about and reference for their appreciation of the things I've had the opportunity to do. But I've made hundreds of records. So the reality is that not everything we do is successful in terms of its profile and what it does in the music business. All of our favorite mixers and producers, it's the same situation. They mix lots of songs, they produce lots of songs, but you really only know them for a handful of things, and you just have to accept that that's the nature of things, and just do your best work, and just leave it at that. I hope that helps.
Awesome answer, lots of insight. The next question is from Tilo. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They ask, when do you know you are done with pre-production and ready to begin recording final tracks? I find this point to be blurry sometimes, not sure if the song is ready for the next step.
Yeah, I guess with what pre-production has become, and that we are actually spending so much time sort of recording while we're writing, and sort of figuring, so many artists and beginners, or people, or the writing process, everything, because now it's like, typically in writing processes, there's someone there building a demo track while it's all going down. So it is confusing that you're kind of almost producing and creating the record as you're starting, and then that's sort of part of the pre-production phase. And then, so when does it actually switch over? Well, I think it's different from case to case, in that sometimes the pre-production recordings and stuff you make really defines the song, and it captures some of the that raw energy that's really vital to the success and energy of the performances that are in a record. So Personally, I'm always very careful about the pre-production process, not to overdo it, to really just be in the pre-production process, be thinking about the bigger things being song selection. And in the song selection process, you sort of have to acknowledge and realize that you need good and complete ideas to select. So you select songs, you work on the bigger gestures of arrangement, making sure that it has enough of the right sections, that they feel like that they're in the right order in the way that they lay out in the song, and that that the structure has a good movement and dynamic to it, that it's a good engaging listen, regardless if it's up tempo, down tempo, whatever it is, as long as it feels like you're engaged and entertained in it. I mean, for me, once you kind of also build a relationship with the artist, you kind of get on the same page about what the overall vision is. I mean, that's kind of what pre-production should be. And then once you have all of those things sort of lined up and sorted out, then you can kind of take the next step over to the recording work. And like I touched on earlier in the answer, a lot of what pre-production is these days is you're actually starting the recording process. So when you're making that switch from pre-production to, recording the master, you just have to have a very realistic evaluation of what should be kept and what you should address. Now, sometimes it's going to be from the ground up, and sometimes it's like, well, we just probably should do the vocal over, or actually the vocal's great from the demo pre-production stuff. We just need to kind of redo some of this instrumentation, and just try and figure that out. And when you take that next step, just be really, the recording process, I mean, it can be a bit problematic, because sometimes when I'm in the recording process, and if there's been a lot of effort put to the pre-production, maybe that I didn't have a hand in terms of demoing the song idea, because people come to me without like an album ready to record. Well, if they have 10 fully realized pre-production demos that they've been listening to for a long time, sometimes it's hard for the artist to make the switch and just accept the record for what it is being different, because it will be different if all the performances are different. Even if you re-record note for note exactly what the pre-production is, when you execute the record, it's going to sound different. It's going to feel a little different. And so sometimes those things are hard to let go of. And so if you're doing all this yourself and you're the artist, I'm also kind of wanting to think about it in that term as well. You just have to be able to take a step back and really evaluate what feels right about it, and make sure you maintain and balance all that stuff. Here again, it's just like a lot of these questions and a lot of my answers there is no black and white. I hopefully me talking around these things and sharing my thoughts gives you a little bit of insight and confidence to navigate these things for yourself, because they're always going to be different. There's a lot of similarities, but the specific conversations you have with those involved, and the material, and the money and time, and how the emotions go up and down. There's so many factors that you've just got to be centered and confident in what you feel like your evaluation is. And then when you get to that place of confident completion, then you have to accept the result. Meaning, kind of going back to the first question, if you do what you think is your best work, and it doesn't really satisfy the label, you either have to work to make the changes that can satisfy it, or just accept that it just didn't work out. There's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of hard realities in this business, and if you want to stay in it, you just have to be able to accept it. So I hope that helps.
Amazing, thank you. Next question is from Volters, and they ask, what's your philosophy on adding multiple layers, instruments, or synth sounds to a production, knowing that a band or artist can't play it all in a concert?
Well, I do a fair amount of that myself. my attitude is you got to do whatever makes the record great. But that has to be a conversation with the artist, and you have to find where their comfort zone lies. Some artists, many artists these days are comfortable playing to tracks, or are they willing to do the live band version where some of those layers and things don't exist, and that the performance and the energy of the performance will convey a strong representation of the record, and that those elements are not absolutely necessary. I think the way that I do it in quite a bit, and maybe what it feels like you're describing, is that the layers that you're putting in there just sort of sonically accentuate and support the main elements that the band's already playing. So it shouldn't really matter. If there's a lot of content that the programming and the underlying stuff gives to the record, and then ultimately would be lacking in a performance, then the band's got to figure out how to play it, or they've got to add a band member to play it, or that really, I have those conversations, and I respect what the artist's feeling is about the next step that they have to do in terms of how they're going to go and represent the record, and make sure that I'm thinking about what the reality is for them specifically, and trying to sort of tailor my vision and execution of the record so that it, if they're willing to play with tracks, then I'm not so concerned about what some of those elements. If they're not willing to play with tracks, or they don't want to play to a click, it's making sure that that we just sort of balance that out, and we don't put too much stuff in there that's going to be lacking when they play live, and just go for that. But ultimately, I want to make a great record, and if I make a great record, that gives the artist an opportunity to go perform. So that has to be your first, your first priority, is make a great record. Figure the live thing out second. Have conversations about it. It's interesting. Two of these questions tie in very closely to a conversation I was having just a little shortly before this question and answer meeting, and it's my own personal feeling that I shared in the conversation was that I'm someone that's been doing that layering of sounds, doing organic, performance-based, band-based artist records, and infusing a lot of this pre-production and sort of underlaying of sound, and kind of weaving in sort of a modern texture of fabric to my records. I've been doing that for a while, and I feel like it's becoming more common, and I think that's very cool. I personally, now that I've been doing it for, I don't know, many years at this point, I'm actually kind of feeling like I want to now get away from it, and I want to go back to making more records of where it's just people playing and performing, and go back to try to find the artists that are a bit more like Kings of Leon, where we didn't use a click track, and there's not a bunch of extra layers in there, and it's just really people being kick-ass. So it kind of comes and goes in waves, and there you go. There's my answer.
Awesome. Matt asks, can you give some workflow suggestions? Specifically, how do you organize so many tracks and document what's what?
Well, I have a pretty standardized way of organizing my tracks, so that it's familiar to me when I get a session. I'm either organizing my own sessions as I go, or when I get stuff from other people, I try to make it conform as closely as I can to what would be normal for me. So it's a bit more comfortable. I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about by taking notes, if you mean just simply in the mixing process, or just the whole process, production to mixing. but taking photographs, making diagrams, either, you know, pen and paper, pencil and paper, and or, you know, creating some documents. It's just very important so that you can, I mean, just like yesterday, we decided that a particular keyboard sound that we'd created, we wanted it to continue in a section of the song. And I kind of could, you know, listening to it, I kind of had a memory of exactly what we'd done, but, you know, in the last few weeks, we've worked on 10 songs and brought them basically to completion, and we've recorded hundreds of things. So it was very valuable to just confirm all the little pieces of the puzzle to kind of get back to a similar sound. So, you know, documentation is important in the process as you're going. I mean, really, it's typically pretty easy, you know, to just snap pictures along the way. My assistant will, you know, we'll have a lyric sheet, you know, typically have a lyric sheet for the song that has a title of the song on it. So, you know, as you're taking pictures, if you need to reference the title of the song, just, you know, take a picture of the lyric sheet so you know what song the picture of all the pedals and keyboard and guitar has to do with. Use the comments section of your session to identify which instrument was played, who played it, maybe if you had a special tuning, any little bit of detail, even if you don't need it in the process. It's like maybe you want to go back a couple projects a few years ago and just sort of just remember and refresh what you did at that time. You know, just kind of getting back to the mix thing. I always put my bass instruments at the top of the session, you know, or what would be the leftmost part of the console. You know, so it's just kind of it's just something left over from working on tape, starting working out on tape years ago, because you know you'd always put your bass on the edge tracks because the high frequency was a little not as stable on a tape machine on the edge track. So you put the bass instrument there, so it's not adversely affected. So you know, bass, programming drums, drum kit, and with programming drums, I put like percussion, anything like that, and then like any live drum elements, and then I go to guitars, electric, acoustic, and then, you know, next, and I'm just sort of talking about the order, top to bottom or left to right of the way I organize things. Then I do guitars, then I would do keyboards, if you have strings or brass, and then I sort of do all that instrumentation pretty much in that type of an order. And then you get to what lead vocals would be, and then background vocals, and then, you know, my mix bus. Of course, there's, you know, all kinds of instrumentation. But those generally cover the big things, and I do them in that order. Dan, does that answer the workflow question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is a question that multiple people have asked. For those that can't afford expensive microphones, do you have any thoughts on this new trend of emulation mics? So there's the Antelope Edge, Townsend Sphere. I think Slate Digital have an emulation mic too, where it can emulate lots of vintage microphones or even modern microphones. Any thoughts on those?
Well, I have a Townsend mic here, and I've been experimenting with it a little bit. Kind of pretty impressed with what that kind of stuff offers. I'm trying to figure out if, you know, personally in a sort of a recording situation, a little bit more mobile, just a little bit more flexible, where, you know, maybe doing some location recording or you know, or whatever. The idea of using a few of those microphones and then be able to change the to change the capture with them. I'm intrigued by it, and from what I've heard, I haven't done a full record or full production, you know, exhaustively used you know, the Townsend mic on several different sources and tried to put it together. But I think, you know, at this point, I have pretty discerning ear in terms of, like, when I hear something, I know, for myself anyways, I know pretty straight away whether it has potential or not for me. I think the technology does. I don't know if it's a be all end all. But I'm very curious, in the same way that I was curious to do the thing with Universal Audio where we did the, I think they call it Jacquire shootout, where we compared the analog equivalent, analog pieces of gear to their Universal Audio emulation equivalents. I was very intrigued to do that, to sort of get the information for myself, test it out, just see what it would demonstrate. And honestly, that's not my normal workflow, because I have a gigantic investment that I've spent my whole life working for all this gear, to have all these tools. I'm not suddenly going to change my workflow. This, what I have is familiar to me, and I like working that way. But I do know now from that that exercise, that video, that I would be totally comfortable, and have been comfortable recording in sort of with all that emulation virtual stuff. And so the microphones, sort of all that background, just to say, I think the microphones now are the next piece in that puzzle, and I'm very intrigued by it. And I think it's definitely useful. And at the end of the day, it's good enough. That technology, I can say this, that technology is good enough if you have a great song and you capture great performances, that sound quality is absolutely good enough to have a hit record. So I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome and very reassuring. Paul asks, I find you've developed and perfected a palette of space that no one else has. For example, Mule Variations is perfectly intimate, and Kings of Leon's Only by the Night has a huge arena sound, and you've explored and applied everything in between. So based on that, what are your thoughts on creating the perfect space and depth in a song? And what are some specific tips for an intimate sound versus a huge arena sound?
Well, thank you very much for the compliment. That's actually pretty huge. I appreciate that. I'm very appreciative of that. It's kind of humbling. So gathering my thoughts, I think, the way that, because I don't have one sound. I don't have, I don't set up the same mics every time, 100%. It's just like, I have the things I like and I do things in a similar fashion, but time to time. But when a project is really different, from one to the next, I definitely spend a lot of time thinking about the circumstance that I'm in, what the song needs, the space that I'm in, how the execution is going to be, how those elements of microphones and all those little choices are going to kind of filter through to the feeling at the end result. I have a lot of experience with a lot of tools, and I've been doing it a long time, so it's a little bit easier for me to look at a list of equipment or think about the tools that I have, and sort of get an idea of what the songs are and how I want them to feel versus, do I want them to feel like this is an arena thing, or do I want it to feel really close and intimate? So I'm able to sort of put a picture around that, and then sort of bring in pieces of equipment and a process and a way of working that I think will pair well with that. And a lot of that's just going to be experience. I think things that, the hallmarks of, and then, so I can't answer the question specifically and like give you a list for each type of situation. A lot of it is just intuitive and how you want to feel things. But the hallmarks of something that's feels like it's an arena. There are longer delays on some of the instrumentation. The reverbs are a bit bigger, but it's the way that you use the reverb. Let's just talk about what would a voice sound like in an arena? Well, you'd have the vocal really loud through the PA, so there'd be this very forward, sort of loud presentation of the voice, but you would hear, and of course they're going to put some reverb on it, but you would also hear the space. Well, the time that it takes for the voice to impact you from the PA versus the sound of the room coming back, well, you style a reverb that has a decent amount of pre-delay and that kind of has that sort of softer, warmer, distant feeling. You know, putting delays on instruments where, you know, if it's panned all to one side, you hear it, it's gonna hear it ricocheting off the walls. You just create something that just feels like it's customized for that space. And then something that's intimate, like Tom Waits, it's recorded in a small room. The microphones are very close, so it almost feels like it's a conversation as opposed to like this big grand presentation. And the reverbs are they're more tailored to the intimacy of the space. A lot of times like with Tom specifically, I would put up room mics that would capture the instrumentation and the voice in the room, keeping in mind that quite a lot of the vocals on Tom's records are part of the performance. I mean, they're live essentially. In the cases where maybe we had to replace a vocal part or we re-sang something, if it was possible to do that because of the leakage on other instrumentation, I would take Tom's voice and I would play it back through a speaker in the same room that we recorded it in and record it with those room mics so that it had the same tone and intimacy. You're not going to put a plate reverb on that kind of a situation that has a really super long decay or it has too much pre-delay. It's not meant to sound like it's like across a big space. It's meant to sound very, very close. And, you know, so those are some of the hallmarks. How do you, I look at each situation as a unique opportunity to create and curate an environment that feels sympathetic to the record and the personality of the song and the performance of the song. I really think about performance a lot. You know, I visualize it somehow being in some space, and then sort of, you know, as I've been talking through some of these few examples, just sort of figuring out in my mind how I can do that. You know, something that I've been doing for a little while. You know, when you've got a song that's just an acoustic guitar and a vocal, let's say, you know, that just the acoustic guitar sometimes struggles to have a big enough, wide enough presentation, and I'll put a micro pitch shifter on it just to give it a little bit of a stereo spread, not to detune it and make it sound wild. I'm talking like, you know, 5 cents sharp, 5 cents flat, and detune it and spread it out a little bit so it just has a little bit more presence. But that I'm not using like long delays and I'm not using reverb to do that, because if I use those things, then suddenly I'm expanding the space which it lives in. I'm just using something that just very incrementally, just a little bit, just widens the pitch center of it, and it kind of spreads it out so it fills the image a little bit more. So that'd be another example of just trying to find ways that are appropriate to the song and the production to kind of give it that intimacy. And you know, when an arrangement for a record, it has just a few elements, and it needs to be everything needs to sound important. That's you know, a lot of, if you have a production where there's a lot of elements and they're really supporting each other, well, chances are that quite a lot of those are not going to sound big and important on their own because they're a component of the presentation. Whereas if you have a smaller palette of instruments, those instruments all need to sound more important, but it's actually it can be more difficult to pull that off, because while they each need to sound important in their own way and carry a lot of space, it's actually even more difficult to at times to make sure they all fit together and they're not overshadowing each other. So there again, I hope some of those thoughts and sharing that answers the question satisfactory. I always feel like I feel like I'm always under answering stuff because there is no clear cut way to do any of this. This is really just about sharing thoughts that give you confidence and insights into how you need to execute these things for yourself, and how you gather your experience and refer back to the notes you've made, the documentation you've made, the conversations you've had, all the things that we've just touched on today. They're all intertwined, and you have to become a master of being able to manage and think about all of it. It's not going to do you any good to just be a bad to the bone one hat of all that. If you really want to be successful, you've got to learn to at least be competent in all these things we're talking about, or at least be thinking about it, because if you're an entrepreneur as well in this endeavor. So yeah, I hope this helps.
Awesome. And by the way, I don't think you're under answering at all. You're giving people a lot more than they bargained for, in my opinion. Okay. Nick asks, in the editing videos, you always move an incorrect audio to the correct time, then crossfade it into the surrounding audio. Would you ever use time stretching instead to fix timing errors?
No, rarely. There's a pretty clear answer. The reason is, Nick, is that when you start time stretching stuff and doing it that way, it changes the sound. It has to. So it's a quick and dirty way to do it. I mean, it's just like, because you can place markers in the audio, and you can conform it to, and you can change the tempo map, and everything will just conform, and everything's always just sort of, it's real easy. But you're changing the sound, and we work so hard to get a good sound. It's rarely something I do. I won't say that I've never done it, because sometimes it sounds cool. It sounds cool because a lot of people do it and it sounds contemporary. So sometimes it's a good signifier or marker of a modern recording that it sounds a little bit degraded in that way, because it is a texture, it is a sound. But for me personally, most of the time, I'd rather take the audio that I have recorded, keep its integrity, and do the work to line it up. Because also, if you just place markers on all the transients and then you just sort of tell it, hey, follow the grid, well, there's no feel in that. There's no discernment of like, because when I move every piece, yeah, I mean, I'm using the grid and my listening as a reference of where it should be, is like how it relates to other things. But sometimes things are ahead and sometimes things are behind, and just the feel of a track, you've got to kind of navigate that, and I need to be, for me, I need to be the judge of how that feels. And you'd probably be pretty shocked if we could look at some we're all trying to make relevant modern, modern maybe the wrong, we're trying to make relevant recordings and relevant records, things that move people now. But we all have an appreciation for the history of music. I mean, I can't speak for everyone certainly that's on this call, but we all like old songs of some. Now, if we were to have the luxury to be able to look at what those multi-tracks would look like, you'd be surprised. I would venture to say they're a lot messier than what the standard is now, but they feel great. They are timeless. They are a relationship of performance. They are people being bad to the bone together, and playing off each other. And you can't replicate that. I mean, so the answer is no.
Amazing. Dave asks, in terms of arranging an instrument choice, there are an infinite number of possibilities. What decision-making approach do you apply or recommend? And I think he's asking, this could be an acoustic song. This could be a big song with a whole band. This could have piano in it. It could have guitar in it. How do you make those decisions?
So can you ask me the first part of the question again? I'm sorry.
Yes. In terms of arranging an instrument choice, there are an infinite number of possibilities. Yeah. What decision-making approach do you apply or recommend?
Well, I think that the infinite decision making gets more difficult when you have an artist that does not have any sort of identity, or they don't play a lot of instruments, and they don't really have a band or a sound yet. Yeah, there's a lot of yeah, there's a lot of possibility. How do you go about it? Well, I mean, it's good to set up some parameters in the pre-production phase, in the the sort of the early vision of it, so that you kind of understand what things you would consider, and what things are sort of outside of um, generally what's possible. Now, sometimes going outside of what's maybe more typical or sympathetic to a certain type of song or a certain type of production arrangement, kind of pulling something out of left field, can be good. Yeah, it's like that's just the difference between having like good taste, and learning to have good taste and making good choices, is um, really not getting caught up in all of the options you have, and just really trying to define it, and sort of pick some things. Give yourself some instrument parameters that you want to work in. It's like, because if you're working with a band, chances are that they have written their songs with the instruments they play, and their complete execution of the song. So that kind of makes the job a lot easier, and then you can kind of draw from other things to kind of accentuate it. But I mean, it's God. I mean, it's such a broad question. It's like, do you want to conform to the norms of a genre, and sort of work with the basic palette of instruments there, or do you want to use the rhythmic signifiers and melodic sensibilities, but then use a whole different set of instruments? I mean, if we're talking, let's just choose reggae as an example. Well, reggae music has a very specific feel, has a very specific set of instrumentation that it usually uses, and a lot of that is dictated by the original influence of soul music being heard, being played on the radio in the United States, and them being able to get it on the radio in Jamaica, and kind of like doing their version of it with the instrumentation that they had, and the sort of the feel that they had in their culture. Um, uh, but the thing is, if you don't use any of that, and I use reggae is because it's pretty defined. It's a pretty defined feel. And the instrumentation is fairly defined. But if you were to do a song with that feel, but use very little of what is traditional instrumentation, you're making a very conscious decision to play something that reflects the genre, but you're going with a completely different interpretation and palette of sounds. So you're making a statement there. So it really comes down to some of the choices you want to make. There's a lot of music now that's very popular that feels very throwback, where they use old recording techniques, and the frequency spectrum that's filled is different. And it's interesting. I watched a fantastic film last night called Green Book. I just loved that movie. The acting in it was so good. And I mean, gosh, the piano. I mean, the music that was performed in the music was just like mind-bendingly good. But then what I really enjoyed is also what I can't say because I haven't done the research, but what it seemed like to me, I didn't really hear music that was familiar to me in the background. It felt very period appropriate. And it was just so inspiring and kind of cool. It's like, because I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, I love the way this sounds and feels, and it feels like it was done now because I'm not familiar with it. It has some of the things that just kind of tell me that it's a newer recording than an actual old recording, but it's done in such a style that it actually feels very period appropriate. So, you know, I was just very inspired and enjoyed that a great deal. And I guess I just mention it because it really depends on what it is you want to portray. And then you kind of have to start big and then sort of narrow it down and just give yourself a few buckets to work from generally in terms of like instrument choice. And then, you know, maybe take some chances on some of it. There you go. That's the best I can answer.
Awesome. Kind of down a similar path. The next question is, what's your song selection process like when working with an artist? Say an artist comes to you with 25 songs. How do you choose which ones you'll record?
The ones that, well, you know, it has to be a group conversation. Typically, the way I like to navigate that is like, okay, if you're going to consider 25 songs, you know, I try to define, okay, well, how many of these are we going to make how many of these are we going to do for the record? If it's 10, it's just like, okay, if it's 10, let's all make our list of 10. It's just like, well, okay, let's make a list of 10, or let's make if 10 feels like too hard a number to arrive at out of 25, it's like, let's make a list of our top 15, knowing that we're still going to have to cut 5 of these, you know? And then, you know, everybody bring their list together, and typically you'll find that 60% of everybody's list kind of has common ground, and that's good. So that's like a place to say, okay, well, this frames the general consensus of majority of the songs, and we can use this as a benchmark for how we're going to evaluate what the rest of them are. Then you can have discussions about why someone chose a song that you didn't, and vice versa, and sort of getting to that core of like 60% lets you know that, you know, maybe song 2 of that 60% is similar to song 19 on the full list, and it's just like, well, I mean, these 2 songs kind of do the same thing, but this one, you know, this one represents that thing better. So, you know, unless we really, you know, really feel like it needs a companion, then we can just kind of, it's the stronger of the 2. Just kind of go through a process like that. I mean, I listen to songs and the selection of songs in terms of like, what's the most exciting to me? What do I feel like I can make the best record out of? And that really just kind of goes down to not necessarily think, oh, well, that sounds like a hit. It's just like, there's something that speaks to me about that song. It's got kind of a vibe that I dig. And then I feel like, it has the raw ingredients to execute a fully realized record, even if maybe it doesn't have all the elements at that time that it needs. And then just kind of carry that conversation forward. And what else can I share about song selection? You can't record them all. It just, the more you record, you know, sometimes there's the discussion of, we got the 25 songs, let's record 15 and then we'll decide on what 10 we're going to put on the album. I don't like doing that, because I've given 50% of my energy to a third of the songs, you know, or well, that's not the right equation, but I've given a lot of energy to songs that we're not going to put on the record. You know, sometimes it's okay to do 1 or 2 extra, but it's a lot of all that energy you're dedicating to those extra songs that you're not going to put on the record. It really does detract and take money and time and energy away from the things you should be focusing on. So I generally try to get it down to like a definitive list that we can sort of work from. And yeah, just try and find balance. And, you know, if in that 25, there's some things that are just really disparaging, they really don't fit the norm or the majority, but I'm attracted to them. There's something about them. It's just like, well, if we can choose that song and kind of include it, and we can kind of figure out how to give it a little bit of a sympathetic thread to the rest of this, I think that's a benefit, because it's not not all of the 10 songs are the same. And I kind of want to build first of all, I select the strongest songs, and then I want to make the most compelling version of each song one by one, keeping in mind the whole, and then when it kind of gets to a certain point towards the end, start to think about, well, how do they sequence? How do they pair with each other? I know a lot of music is not really listened to in a sequenced fashion anymore, but there are still a lot of opportunities where that does happen. And regardless of whether that is going to be the outcome for it or not, I like it's a better, more creative way to think about it. So in terms of putting things together and the journey of a whole, listen to an album project, a body of work. Maybe it's an EP or it's a few songs or however. So hopefully there's some insight in there.
Awesome. The next question is from Mark, and he says, during the course you mentioned your friend Spencer assisting as a pre-producer.
Mm-hmm.
What do you look for when selecting someone like Spencer to fulfill that role? And what do you recommend a person like Spencer do to get the attention of a producer like yourself?
Good questions. Well, Spencer and I have been friends for a long time. I made a record. How I got to know him was I made a record with him for his band, Moon Taxi. And then, so I know that we have very similar taste. We have very similar taste. We feel music a lot the same. He would be a great, he's just a great co-creator for me, because there's a lot of sympathetic territory, but he's also very different. He's very talented in ways that, we have a lot of common ground, but then we also have talents that, fill each other out in nice ways. So that's why I know that he is someone that's really great to work with for me personally. And we have a long work history. We've done tons of stuff together now. And so the conversation's, much easier and clearer. That person needs to be someone that understands the record making process as well. Not just they're not just purely a creative musician. Spencer is also an accomplished record maker, so he understands my needs as well. So he's giving me, when we're creating stuff together, he's giving me stuff that sort of fits into the record making process. So there's a bit of refinement that he's able to deliver in that way. But he's not the only person that I have worked with in that capacity. And I wouldn't say, in the same way that I'm not right for everything in every record or every artist, every situation, he's not either. So you just kind of have to realize what's appropriate in certain situations. And then in terms of being a Spencer or someone that helps with that kind of stuff, how do you get the attention of a producer? You just got to do some good work and put it out there. But then if, maybe offer yourself into a situation or send some of your work to a producer you aspire to work with, kind of make them aware of you. If this is something that you want to do on a bigger stage, broader scale, put a little clip of you making your your content, and share it on Instagram, share a snippet on Instagram, put it on YouTube, market yourself that way. Show you in your creative process, and put the music up, and let people know that that you're available to that process, and that maybe that track that you created is available for someone to co-write on with you. And then maybe send some music to someone you aspire to work with. You got to build a profile for yourself. You have to put yourself out there, and you've got to do a lot of work to be really proficient and flexible in all situations. Spencer and I have worked on a bazillion songs, so it's like we have a pretty good understanding of the process that gets us to the result where we want to be. And yeah, I hope that helps.
Awesome. Next question is from Mark Workman. I work alone, I don't have many vocal mics, but don't want all the background vocals to all sound the same. Any tricks on how to achieve this?
Well, I mean, you've already sort of, it's a good question, Mark. And you've already kind of answered the question a little bit. Yeah, you should, most of the time, not use the same microphone for backing vocals. If you're doing all the vocal parts, the background vocals should have a different mic, even maybe a different, room that you're recording in, if you can. Obviously with a lead vocal, typically these days we put so much compression and stuff on it that you don't want to be in an ambient space. But like with background vocals, you can definitely try some different mics. You don't want the same sonic thumbprint, and then maybe you don't need to be as close and intimate with the microphone in certain instances as you would with a lead vocal. Part of every recording session when I get started is I identify which microphone is going to be the best microphone for the vocalist, because I want to find that out in the beginning and then not be using that microphone on the drum overhead or acoustic guitar or something else, to where personally I'm not having to constantly switch back and forth in a more of a in a situation where you're on your own and you don't have as many resources and you just have a few mics. Well, yeah, you might be in a situation where you have to change your mic around a lot, but just sort of talking about the fact that it's important to make the right microphone selection. If you have 3 microphones, just pick the one that sounds the best for the song on your lead vocal, and then try and use one of the other ones for the background vocals. If you only have one microphone for your vocals, get the best possible signal path you can for the lead vocals, and then change something about the signal path for the background vocals. If you're using mic pre-emulations, use a different mic pre-emulation, use a different compressor, put the mic in a different part of the room, or just do things that differ, to kind of give it a little bit of a different sonic thumbprint and give it a little bit of different, differentiation, so that you're not working with the same sonic thumbprint, trying to put these vocal parts over top of each other. Find a way to where they kind of create a little bit of space and support for each other. There you go.
Amazing. The next question is also related to background vocals. How would you mix a gospel style background vocal that's having a question answer interaction with the lead vocal in a louder section of the song? Imagine a wall of voices kind of feel, and I'm working with 3 to 4 different harmonies, doubled, all performed by the same vocalist.
How would I do what with that?
How would you mix a gospel style background vocal that's having a question answer interaction with the lead vocal in a louder section of the song?
Okay. Well, obviously, if the answer, I'm guessing that the answer is the sort of the gospel element of it. But regardless, if you've got 3 or 4 intervals of harmony in the gospel choir answer element, it's going to be quite big and quite powerful. Typically in a situation where I have layers of vocals with different intervals, harmonies, kind of making a big presentation, well, I try to you got to pan stuff out. I tend to leave some of the lower intervals, because I don't just put everything just wide left and right. It's just like I would typically blend some of the lower intervals more towards the middle, and the higher harmonies, kind of spread them out a little bit more. I don't put the same reverb or delay on all of the different elements of the backgrounds, and sometimes I don't put anything at all on a few of them. It's like if you have let's say you have two voices for every part, I might put reverb on one and delay on the other, or just reverb on one and nothing on the other. I tend to do a little bit less of effects on the lower intervals because I want them to feel, I don't want them to be washy in the low frequencies. I don't want it to feel murky down there. So like reverb and delay can kind of accentuate that a little bit. I'm not saying that I do them dry all the time, but maybe I only put a micro pitch shift on the low vocals. What else can I think of? I try to treat them as a group. Once I get all the panning and balance stuff sort of worked out, and what effects I'm using and what things are sending to the effects, you know, kind of pairing those things. You know, like on a higher interval, it's, you know, it might be great to have the one on the left have the reverb and the one on the right have the delay. But if I've got a delay that's kind of working in stereo, I'll put the longer delay time on the other side of what's feeding it, and then the shorter delay closer to it, because if the shorter delay is closer to it in the image, that will feel a little bit more like reverb, but without the long tail that this one over here is sending to the reverb and kind of like filling the color out. So you kind of hopefully can visualize that, you know, one element of an interval is kind of creating a wash of reverb, but because I'm not putting both in them, the coloration of the reverb is not as undefined. It's not as washy because it's just one of the interval. It's just one of the voices of that interval speaking into it, and then sort of the delay is kind of working the same. Kind of get a lot of mileage out of stuff like that. But then treating them all together, you know, you might need to put a little bit of individual compression on all of, you know, on a few of the elements, but like balancing them and then treating them all together with one, you know, like with an compressor and EQ that kind of helps focus the whole thing. And, you know, making sure that in that, you know, that more specifically back to your question, if it's a, you know, if it's a question and answer type of vibe, you know, the lead vocal man, it's just so much about impression. It's just like, you kind of want them to be more on equal footing. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is you want them to have a more similar volume so that the lead vocal doesn't feel so much louder than the answer, because then they don't feel like they're actually having a conversation. A conversation, you know, typically is people are talking, you know, the conversation and the volume of the exchange is kind of similar. So you kind of want to pair them that way. But then again, depending on the mood and dynamic of what that interplay is supposed to be telling you, one of them may be louder than the other. You know, if it's like, if the question is, you know, if the question is the preacher, we're in a gospel situation, so I'm going to use a church. If the preacher is asking a question, then he's going to be loud and forceful in terms of a presentation. He's going to be loud and forceful and maybe not have as much ambience. And then the answer coming back from the choir is going to be a little bit more diffused, have more ambient treatment, and maybe not quite be as loud. You know, so just, you know, ties back into some of the questions I've already answered. You have to sort of, I tend to put myself in a scenario, in a situation, to sort of think about what the relationships might be, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the listener to feel that environment. And so for me, that's kind of how I think about it a little bit. Yes, that's what I got on that one.
Awesome. The next question is a bit more technical. This is from Les.
Mm-hmm.
I put Waves VU meters on each individual channel and calibrate them all to minus 18 dB. So I'm hitting what would be around 0 dB in the analog realm.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a good place to calibrate the VU meter on my mix bus to ensure the entire mix hits around 0 dB?
Uh, well, I guess it's almost warrants a conversation. It's like, well, like if, well, you're saying, well, the thing is you're saying that you use -18 for your tracks as as what you want the reference to 0 to be. How, I mean, when you get to the mix, it's like, well, how loud do you want your mix to be? I can't answer the question without knowing how loud you want your mix to be. I typically set my 0 on a VU meter to be like -12 or -9, because that way hopefully that's answering the question for you, because there's not enough. It's kind of almost a conversation. It's like, because it's like, what do you want to achieve with your volume at your mix? You know, if you want something that approaches CD volume of level, -6 is really, really loud. But -9 is kind of a good benchmark. -12 can be okay. I mean, I think that, you know, a VU meter is a good reference for me, because it's something I've been doing this for over 30 years. So it's like, a VU meter is something that was the majority of the meters we had back at that time. But, you know, now we have the ballistics that we look at are so different, and the way that, you know, the loudness energy is measured for things like Spotify and streaming. They're using a different scale. They're using like LUFS, and there's different kinds of meters. But metering, I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure why you are using -18 with VU on all your individual tracks. I mean, having everything, like if 0 is your target with the VU, you're going to be printing some things too loud and some things too quiet, based on their frequency content with the way that a VU meter works. You know, like low end, like a bass instrument is going to have way more visual output, or, you know, gain level on a VU meter than like a hi-hat, something that just has high frequency energy. But if you print like something like a hi-hat at 0 on a VU, it's going to be blisteringly loud. And your bass element printed at 0 VU might not be loud enough. And so I'm not quite sure why you do that. I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's just not the way I think about it. I feel confident that it's a, you know, and here that I just want to reiterate, I'm not criticizing your method. I just don't fully understand it, I guess, your reasons. But that aside, if it works for you, and you are able to, and it's a system that you understand, and you have a great outcome, keep doing it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I don't quite understand it. And then to answer the second part of the question about how loud to make a VU, yeah, I just would say again that, you know, -9 is generally where I set that target for a VU reference on my mix.
Cool. Philippe asked two technical questions, so I'll read them one at a time.
Yeah.
The first question, well, firstly, he says that you're a huge inspiration for my life, and Only by the Night is, for me, one of the best records ever made. His first question is, what tape machine and what RCA preamp for the room mics were used on Only by the Night?
I used a Studer A27 as the multi-track. It had a 16-track head on it. The RCA tube pre's, they are OP6s, I think. Yeah, they're just, you know, just kind of like lunchbox style portable tube mic preamps from the 50s. Retro Instruments, Phil has made a modern version of them, which is really, really cool. So those are the pieces.
Awesome. And the second technical question is, if you are using a mono mic as an overhead for drums, and that would be a mic like the elam 251,
Yeah.
and DX77s as stereo spread on the ride and the hi-hat, how do you go about positioning them?
Oh, well, typically the snare drum, sorry, the overhead, you know, if you're looking, if we're looking down at the drum kit, you know, if we're looking down at the drum kit, where the snare drum and if you're looking just straight down over the drum kit, where the snare drum is and the kick drum pedal and the, you know, the shell, like the back side of the kick drum shell and the rack tom, you know, that's sort of like, that's the very center of the drum kit, basically. I mean, that's kind of the most centralized place. So I tend to start somewhere in that area. It depends on several things. You know, what, how someone plays, how they, you know, because a drummer has a great deal to do with the way the balance of the drums come across. So I start there, and then also how high above the drum kit is also a factor. I tend to somewhere between 4 and 5 feet above the snare drum, at the most, probably. Is where I would position the microphone, and you have to move it around. Like if you have to move it around to kind of get where the snare drum speaks really well, and the rest of the drum kit feels somewhat balanced, and you're not getting, because when you're using a mono overhead and the cymbals are out here, that you're not, it's that the cymbals feel somewhat balanced in it, so that it's just not like too much over one and then another's quiet. So you just kind of have to find that place. I mean, the closer you get to the drums, like the lower the microphone is, maybe the less overall balanced the picture becomes, and the microphone becomes, because it just sort of focuses in more on one element. So getting a little bit of height can matter, and then moving it typically out over towards the front of the kick drum a little bit can kind of make a bit of a difference. So just finding that sweet spot in there, and then with the RCAs, it's like, you know, just literally if my hand here is the hi-hat, you know, just putting it just above it in kind of a normal kind of position, and then if my hand is the ride, you know, just somewhere above it, but where the ride cymbal wiggling around is not going to crash into the mic stand or the microphone. So somewhat close, because I'm wanting to use those to be very specific for those two elements, and then rolling a lot of the bottom end off on them. I mean, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 hertz, just cutting all that stuff out of there. So it really is. So I'm not getting all the low end wash and leakage of the drum kit, and it really is just about the articulation of those you know, cymbals, and then I can kind of place those, spread those out just a little bit in the stereo picture, not all the way wide, but, you know, sort of somewhere in here, you know, 75% of the way out towards the edges, and leaving the mono overhead in the middle. Sometimes I slightly move it to the side, just depending on how the balance is with room mics and everything, and where I want the feel of the snare to sit in the middle. I think that answers it.
Awesome. Yes, it does. Natty asks, in recording acoustic guitar for Bury It, you added a second microphone. What phasing issues can that cause? Or do you measure the second mic position to be exactly at an equal position from the source and the other mic, i.e. an equilateral triangle, to avoid phasing? Or do you sometimes deal with it later in the mix?
Rarely would I change a phase relationship, like positioning wise. I wouldn't move one track against the other if that's what that part of the question is. If there was a real big issue, then I might just ditch one. and not use it. Just try. I mean, it's not really truly an equilateral triangle. I'm just putting two different microphones in place, one to kind of get the more articulate, brighter aspect of the guitar sound, and then the other one is really more about kind of getting some body and just some tone and weight and kind of blending them together. And I use two different mics because I typically try to use one that's pretty high fidelity and one that's not as high fidelity, and then so I can kind of shift it between sounding more polished, less polished, and kind of mix and match. Honestly, I'm trying to remember exactly what microphones I used for the Acoustic on Barrett, and I don't. You know, I've recorded a lot of acoustic guitars since then, and I don't do the same thing every time. So it really depends. I make sure that the phase agreement is you know, the polarity is correct when I record it. Before you record something with multiple mics, you should check how they add up in mono and make sure that they are not that they're accentuating each other, not like one is not detracting from the other. Don't, like, if you have two mics and your intention is to have a stereo image, make sure that before you really commit to that recording that stereo image, that you just put them together and make sure that they have a good polarity agreement. You're never going to get perfect phase with two microphones on a source, and you know, so you have to understand the trade-offs and also selecting two microphones that don't have too much overlap frequency wise. I mean, where they fit really nice together. But there's a good complement, so that when you put them together, there's less about the conversation where there's the chance for the weirdness of phase and canceling. What else can I say about it? So primarily, the positioning of the microphones is about the tone I'm trying to capture and how the two microphones pair together. But there's so many things that go into making a good acoustic guitar recording. The pick matters. I can't reach it because I'm tethered with these headphones. But you know, I have a bowl of, it's got like, I don't know, it's got a couple hundred picks in it, all different sizes and textures and thicknesses, material, because all that stuff really matters in the way that it translates on microphones for the part, and the way it fits into the recording of a song. If you can, having multiple acoustic guitars around to find the right one for the part in the song is also a nice luxury. But a more affordable way to make sure you're doing it is have some different picks around. What else can I say? You know, sometimes, you know, you also experiment with like how close you're putting the microphones. Sometimes having things back a little bit, and not being so hyper focused. And as you move a microphone back from something, the blend of frequencies and the balance of frequencies tends to get a bit better. And then they sort of arrive at the microphone in a little bit more balanced fashion. But then the trade-off is sometimes you get away from some of the articulation you need, and then you bring into the picture the ambience of the space. So yeah, you know, so those things are also things to consider. What's next?
Just along the same path, would you ever consider DIing an acoustic guitar if they've got pickups? Sure,
absolutely, and do it, because it can be a very useful sound. It's typically not a complete sound, but you know, absolutely can be a very, very good, thing. I don't know if it's out yet, but I recently did a thing. And I don't think I'm spoiling it by saying this, but I recently did a thing for Universal Audio that we were partnered with Taylor Guitars, and we were, you know, sort of showing some of the new guitars that Taylor's making, and you know, working with an Apollo, with the mic with the with the mic pre-emulations, the Unison technology. Sorry, I was blanking out there for a second. and recording acoustic guitars and talking about techniques in that as well, which it should be out soon if it isn't already. So those of you that might be interested in asking these questions, maybe that would be that's that's something I was involved in that you could watch and maybe get a little bit more information on this, get some like practical listening and visual demonstration of what I've been talking about. But then it's well, shoot, now I forgot the question. What was the question? Oh, DI. Yeah. So in that the Taylor guitars had good DIs in them, and so we experimented with that, and it blended in really beautifully to some of the microphones. I think in terms of a recording situation, I'm not simply satisfied with a DI, but it can be a very useful part of the sound. I think performing live, they really can be life-saving and essential.
Awesome. Andrew asks, I've just begun working with other artists in a producing and mixing capacity after spending years primarily as a sideman instrumentalist. Mm-hmm. I've noticed that the work I've done so far tends to have a sonic personality that is me, informed by the music and sounds and vibe that I like, even if the work is in different genres and with different artists. Should I embrace that personal sound, or should I be working to be more transparent? And if I should be working to be more transparent, do you have any advice on how to do that and put my own personal sound more in the background?
No, I don't think you should. I don't think you should work to be more transparent. I think that as artists and creators, our best value proposition is in being ourselves and being just that being defined and strong. I mean, being transparent, I don't really feel like that's a good goal. I think being sympathetic to and understanding other ways of doing things is important. It's because it shouldn't be a case of just like, well, this is me, take it or leave it. It needs to be like, okay, well, I understand where that's not exactly like me, and that where I can adapt me towards something, as opposed to being transparent. I think if your goal is to be transparent and right for everything, then you don't really have any place that you're coming from. And I think it's important as creators that we need to come from someplace. We need to have a perspective, we need to have a creative point of view, and at least come from that place. Now, all the time, especially as a record maker, we're coming from someplace and we're engaging the artist and we're meeting them somewhere. But if you're always standing in the meeting place in full transparency, it's like you're not really going to have a sound. You're not going to have any substance. You're not going to have something that's attractive. You need to kind of have something that kind of bring together, as opposed to just, I don't know, that's maybe a poor analogy, but definitely be your own person, be your own creator, with the knowledge that you're not perfect for everything and you need to be adaptable, and that because you're not right for everything, you're not going to get to do everything, and the things that are unlike you as a creator, that doesn't mean that you can't take inspiration from it and have your own interpretation of it.
Amazing. Ernie asks, a lot of songs are presented with a video. Do you take care about the video contents already on recording, as this may have influence to a special type of setting, for example, reverb, when the video shows a big plate or a small room?
Typically, I'm not doing the video stuff's very secondary to what I do. It's like I'm not a video maker. I'm not making music for videos. I'm making music, and the videos get made for the music. So I don't, unless somebody tells me that that's something I need to consider, or it's part of the vision for the project, I don't really think about that stuff too much. I'm making records, and records are, to me, are all like an auditory. Even though I talk about a lot of visual references, and I do have a lot of visualizations in my, in referencing and inspiration. I'm not really making recordings for videos necessarily. So, but like if that's the job, if that's what somebody asked me to do, I'm supposed to do a film next summer. I was supposed to do it this summer, but it got postponed until next summer. That's going to be very much a part of, I definitely am going to have to consider the visual environment as I tailor the sound of the music to it. So in that case, yeah, but in general, as a record maker, no, I'm not, because I'm not the video maker. Typically, if you've seen content where we're in the studio, or I've been in the studio with an artist, it's because they're just capturing what we're doing. We're not doing something. We're not filling a role for them. They're capturing what we're doing. I don't know, hopefully that adds some clarity.
Awesome. Ewan asks, could you talk about compromise when mixing? I'm sure there must be times when, despite your best efforts, you can't get competing parts to fit, so you have to discard or relegate one or more of the parts in some way. Can you talk a bit about your philosophy on that, and also some strategies to try before you decide to discard or relegate one or more parts?
Well, I mean, I guess you're sort of talking about this in terms of being just the mixer. So you're just kind of being handed something with a bunch of, with a production that, and you've got to sort it out. I think in the process, in being a good producer and good creator and creating a good record, you shouldn't have built something that has those competing elements, unless you're really trying to intentionally do something specific where that's like a mechanism of the expression. But if you're the mixer and you're in a situation, you just you just kind of have to try and creatively figure it out. I always, the thing is if somebody sends me something, when they send me something as a mixer, unless they've specifically given me a directive, I just to make some of those types of decisions, I always just look at it as like, well, this is what they recorded, this is what they sent me. They probably want all this stuff in there. I typically, if I'm going to do something really bold and turn something off that feels like it's going to be missed, I'll ask about it. Or, if I do some editing or arranging that I feel like is really absolutely necessary for my product, my job, my mix to come off the right way, I'll do it, fully aware that someone may not like it the way I've changed it, or something I've muted or whatever, and just be ready to sort of work through like putting it back in the way that they had it. Because as a mixer, in this role as a record maker, we're at the service of others. It's only if you are writing, recording, producing, and mixing your own stuff as an artist, are you able to have a singular vision. And that's a very hard thing to do. But people do it. So creative ways to make those things fit together. Man, I don't know. Sorry, I don't mean this to be a cop out, but you just kind of have to use your imagination. You just have to tinker with stuff. And then it'll happen, hopefully, where you send out a mix and there's no comments. That's happened to me a couple times recently, it's a very nice feeling. And, I want someone to comment on it. It's like, it's just when you get past like, when you get into long lists that just kind of keep coming after revision, that kind of stinks. I get pretty bummed out about that, because it sort of dilutes all of the, that initial sort of engagement and power. But anytime I'm asked to change something, I do it in a way that I feel good about it. It's like, can you make the baritone guitar more reverby? Well, I do it in a way, even like, because maybe I didn't put reverb on it to begin with, because that's the way I thought it should be. But if the client says to me, hey, can we put some reverb on that? It's like, well, okay. how can I put reverb on it that still sort of honors the way that I felt about it to begin with? And how can I find a compromise? I'm not just going to slap some reverb on there and go like, well, there's your reverb. I'm going to do it in a way that I feel good about and honor their request because I'm working on their behalf. If I try it and I don't like it, I'll just tell them it's like, well, I can't do it in a way that I really like. I don't think we should do it. I tried, I voiced my opinion, and they say, I want the reverb on there. You're like, well, just do the best possible job I can. And it's like, it has to be, it's for them. They're paying me to work on their art. So it's just kind of a creative thing. I mean, if there's competing parts, I try to put competing parts in other areas of the image so that they're not over top of each other, totally messing with each other. That like, if they're going to compete, at least they're competing in a way where that there's an interplay, and then I can actually kind of pay attention to just one or the other, or something in between. So there you go.
Great. The next question is from Urko, who asks, when you have an instrument that's been recorded with several microphones, in particular acoustic guitar, because that's what he plays, do you work EQ compression on each mic or track separately or all together?
A bit of both. A bit of both. I think generally in terms of EQ, there'd be a little bit more separately. I mean, so I would have to guess or assume that if you've got a selection of microphones on acoustic guitar, if you're printing them all separately, like printing each mic separate, a lot of times I'll blend mics together. If I've got two mics on acoustic guitar, I'll make the blend. If I feel confident that the choice I can make in the recording is to commit to the sound, I'll blend them together. I might EQ them each a little bit separately to tailor them to fit together in the relationship that I want. And then I might run them, that balance and that relationship, through a compressor together to sort of further put them together and print them on one track. If I don't feel like I'm going to have, if I'm going to get myself into a situation where a request is going to be made of me later, to change it dramatically, well, then I might kind of chicken out. I don't like to do this, but I might print the tracks separately. I don't like that way of recording if I can avoid it, because it's not a committed way of recording. The sound is not as defined as it could be, because I can still change the balance of it. I just like I like recording to a simple execution. Even though all of you've watched some of the production stuff I've done, it's like, yeah, Barry's got a ton of tracks. But within that, in every opportunity that I can, I try to commit to that, make those types of commitments. There's probably some things that I did in that production as a demonstration that were keeping in mind some of the ways that other people work, and kind of leaving it a little bit more open for interpretation, in terms of maybe not printing everything, like all microphones to one track, so that I could, sort of demonstrate some different things, or that there's some options there for teaching purposes and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like, but at the same time, that's my general rule of thumb. You certainly can figure out different ways to do things equally well. But in general, that would be the approach, is to do a little bit of EQ individually, do a little bit of group compression, and then maybe after the group compression, do a little bit more of overall EQ to that combined sound. That would be a pretty typical way that I would execute something.
Amazing. Next, by the way, we've crossed 90 minutes. Are you good to take a few more questions?
Yeah, I can. Yes, I just have a hard out at the top of the hour.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. The next question is from John. He says, I often end up recording solo acoustic performers who want to play and sing at the same time. I know the standard kind of mixing and setup tricks to minimize bleed, but it always still seems to happen. Do you have any preferred methods that help this, or is it best to just allow the bleed to happen naturally and capture the performance that way? And also, would this be best to mix in mono, or is a slight pan beneficial here?
Okay, well, if you've got a performer that's good enough and you've got enough isolation on the microphones where you can actually balance balance and EQ and compress things in a satisfactory way, where one of the microphones doesn't dictate the whole picture, then yeah, embrace it. But I also personally try to, I'm not going to put, if I'm doing an acoustic guitar vocal performance and I'm cutting them together, I don't put two large diaphragm condensers on both things. I mean, because you got tons of leakage with those types of microphones. With a vocal, I would put something like an SM7 on the vocal because there's a lot of rejection and isolation from the acoustic guitar. And then I'd use but I'm still going to get a little bit of the acoustic guitar bleeding to the vocal. And most of what it's going to be is the percussive, brighter articulation that's the thing that's going to get into that SM7 a little bit more. So kind of keeping that in mind. And then so that's a brighter, so I know that the way that microphone performs and the isolation that I get with it on the vocal, I'm very aware of what part of the guitar is going to get in how that leakage is going to sound. And so I typically will choose a microphone that will pair well with that, and I'll use something like a ribbon mic, like a Coles or a 121, Royer 121 or Coles 4038, because the rejection on the side of a ribbon mic is very pronounced. So I'm not going to get that. I'm going to get some vocal in it, but I'm not going to get as much. And because the ribbon microphone listens in front and back of it, I'm going to get from the back of the microphone, I'm going to get a little bit of the room tone, a little bit of the ambience for the guitar and the voice. But but those microphones are a bit darker than if I was using a large diaphragm condenser mic. And so I'm going to have the top end, I'm going to have the higher frequency bleed in the vocal mic. And then I'm going to have, because it's a darker microphone, I'm going to have the lower tones of the voice leaking in, and they're going to fill each other out. I hope that makes sense. And they're going to be pretty isolated from each other, but they're going to fill each other out. And then in terms of mixing it, somewhat mono. I mean, I might pan them just slightly, just to kind of give it but not make it feel lopsided, because if it's one person playing it, it's not going to sound like the voice over here and the acoustic over here necessarily. You can do that. You can make that artistic choice. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But I'd kind of keep them more centralized. But then an example earlier where I put the micro pitch shifter on the guitar, the voice I'm going to have in the middle, I'll probably put most of the reverb on the voice, probably won't put it on the acoustic, because there's going to be enough acoustic guitar bleed in the vocal. The hint of reverb, it's also going to be in the reverb. And then I might put the micro pitch, and then I put the micro pitch shift on the guitar to kind of widen it out. So you've got the vocal kind of here in the middle, and then the acoustic is just a little bit wider than it. So that's the way I would execute that.
Awesome. Clark asks, when you work with artists on crafting songs, how do you usually start that process? For example, if a song has areas that could clearly be improved, do you bring it up proactively? What issues do you most commonly encounter? Are there any suggestions that you find yourself offering again and again?
Yeah, definitely address things as soon as possible. But at the same time, you kind of have to, in being a good producer and working with others, you got to kind of ease your way into the relationship. You have to build confidence, and you just can't hit them with a long list, straight off the bat, because then you kind of maybe make them think that they're not, that they're not up to the job, or they're not good enough, or it's we got to be careful about people's emotions and criticism. So, try to deal with the bigger issues. Like if a song's not finished, it's I don't know. I say very politely, it's well, I love what the song feels like, but I feel like the chorus isn't quite fully realized, or I don't know that we have all the elements of the song, or yeah, we need an intro, or this bridge is just way too long. I kind of lose interest and focus on the song. Just kind of being honest and evaluate and talk about the bigger things, and then sort of chip away, address the bigger things that I'm feeling about a song and where it stands, and just kind of keep building on the relationship, keep dialing down. I'm not ever looking to perfect a song before we go in to make a record. Making the record is perfecting the song, in terms of that presentation. Gosh, I feel like I'm forgetting part of the question down. But is that answering it?
No, that does answer it.
Okay. Sorry. I think I'm getting a little.
No problem.
Sorry if that's not. I hope that answer helps.
Nathan asks, I've always liked the idea of adding virtual instruments such as synths or audio loops into a song where things like that would not typically be expected, such as classic rock or alternative rock songs. However, I have always struggled with owning in on exactly the tonal loop I want. In your experience, what role should virtual instruments and loops play within a song in order to best accomplish the goal of adding musical intrigue and interest to the record? And also, how do you go about finding the best audio loops to suit your needs?
Well, they've got to fit and feel sympathetic, and sort of part of the sound. I mean, if you're doing a loop, and you're going to put a live drum kit on it, well, you've got to make, sometimes if I'm pairing like a live kit performance with a loop, sometimes I ask the drummer not to play the kick drum, or I don't mic the kick drum, or I have the balance of the kick drum really, really low. I just have it in there for a little bit of a reference, maybe for editing, or, just have a well-recorded kick drum, but maybe not really using it a lot. They have to work well together. You're not going to have like this big, amazing drum sound and then a big, amazing program loop. And then, if there's got to be some give and take in relationship to it. I mean, how do you choose those things? How do you find them? Honestly, a lot of times I just create them. I kind of custom make them. I know that's going to be like, okay, well, that doesn't really help me. But if I need like a big fat kick drum sample, sometimes I'll make it. Sometimes I'll gather a few different samples that cover different areas of the spectrum, and put blend them and overlay them, and then I might record a real kick drum with them. Maybe just use it for the room sound, and just kind of pair things together. I wish I had like a very clear answer of like how to find those things. I mean, I use all the same resources I use native instruments. I use stuff out of Logic, Ableton, found sounds, share sounds with other people, create my own samples. I have a hard drive full of samples that I have used over the course of the last 10 plus years, or no, actually, well, probably more. I have other samples on there like 20 years old. Just have a collection of them, and just use all those resources and mix and match things together, and kind of custom treat them. Sometimes I'll put lo-fi on something, or a sans amp on something, or what I did the other day was I was recording a tom part, and the toms were tuned to the song. They sounded really good with the song, the right intervals and the key, but they just weren't as heavy as I wanted them to be. So I put, after I recorded them, because I couldn't do this while I was recording them because I was using a plugin to do it. And it was it's a native plugin, so you can't record with a native plugin on. So what I did is I used Alter Boy, and I pitch shifted it down an octave, and I blended in. I probably had 35-40% of the lower octave and I had to change the formant and the style of the pitch shift to fit with the toms, but I was able to blend that lower octave in, and it kind of it worked. It made it really, made it heavy and made it fit what I was going for. So it's kind of gotta get a little creative and use everything you possibly can. And I'm probably not being as much help as you might like, but that's the best I got.
Awesome. Do you have any thoughts on these AI mastering services like Landr and Emastered? Have you ever A/B'd?
I haven't spent a lot of time A/Bing that stuff. I think it can be useful. I think it can kind of be an affordable, quick path to getting something. Because those things are, they're becoming smarter and smarter. The more stuff they master, the more work they do, and the more they analyze the output and what's on the, what's out there, the better it gets. I think it's a perfectly fine, fast, cheap alternative. It will never replace a trained, experienced, tasteful, mastering engineer. Because there's, music is meant to have, it's an emotional expression. There's human energy in it. It's meant to convey something. It's meant to make people feel something. Machines certainly can help us do that, but they are not going to make some of the finer discernments and draw on an emotional wisdom to execute certain things. So I think that they're fine. I think that they have their place. They're useful. Running your song through Landr before you actually take it to a mastering engineer might give you an idea of what is possible. It might be good for a good reference. It's like that might be a good experience before you go and try and find the right mastering engineer, or decide that the mastering engineer has done the right job for you. So I'm the type of person that thinks that everything is useful. It's just how you interpret it and how you use it. That's what makes us creative. I appreciate that everyone has purchased this course and has spent the time with me and invested in this and investing in yourselves, because that's what you should be. You're investing in yourselves. But that's where the creativity is. It's like taking all this information, all your experience, and kind of crafting something special. There is no button that we can push. There is no service that we can hire. There is no resource of samples. There is no copying another record that will make something unique and special that's connected to you as a creator. I think everything is good and useful. It just depends on how you engage it.
Awesome. We'll take 2 to 3 more questions.
Yeah, I'll try to be quicker because I have 11 minutes.
No problem. Do you have any tips for building a network of people to work with as a producer, in terms of how to reach out, or should they keep reaching out and pursuing bands directly? And how can they build relationships with labels and other sources that could bring repeat clients over time?
Yeah, I mean, have those conversations, reach out, don't be annoying. Don't send 5 emails, send 1 email. You got to put yourself out there. You have to be vulnerable, but don't overdo it in any one situation, because then that can be a turnoff. Use all the resources that are out there to connect in social media. Research the genre that you want to work in and the people that work in it, and try to get closer to the environments that they work in. Try to get closer to them, but don't expect, just because you ask and you have a desire to be somewhere and do something, that you feel like that you have talent. That doesn't mean that you're going to be given opportunities. a lot of times we have to create our own opportunities. We have to take the things that we know and believe in, and we have to just do them and put them out there and let them have their life and continue, so that hopefully someone will notice. And when someone notices, you've created a body of work that speaks for you as a creator. This is a super hard industry to get into. It takes a lot of breaks. It takes being in the right place at the right time. It takes having the right attitude, and just kind of curate that thing for yourself. Don't be afraid to be bold and ask and offer yourself and put yourself out there. But also know what are professional boundaries and what makes you appealing. If somebody's throwing themselves on you, you kind of like, hey, go away. It's just like, back off. You don't want to be a turnoff either. So it's just, you got to do the work. You got to create a community of friends and connections. Do the research for the places and people you want to be connected with. And if you can't connect with them, directly, do things that are of a quality and that represent you in a way that maybe they'll find you. And you just have to keep working and pursue it. What's the next question?
Okay, so this is I think we should end on this one because it's a big point.
Okay.
This person says, we used to have a joke in art school that it takes two people to finish a painting, an artist to paint it and another person to take it away. I'm feeling that this rings true with creating music too. When do you know it's done? How can you tell a record is complete? When should you stop?
Well, that analogy sort of, it's art is, it's just all in the eye of the beholder. And as a creator, and I think this is a trap that a lot of creators fall into, especially when they're less experienced and they haven't had a success yet, or they haven't put their first thing out. And you've just got, in the same way that you've got to write a lot of songs to get a few good songs, you got to just make art and put it out and move on. Now, put it out, that doesn't necessarily mean, it's going to go up on, like, if you're making records, it's going to go up on Spotify and you're going to get 1 million, streams. It's like, you just may, just complete something and then move on, do some more. How do you know when something is done? Well, start with a plan. Start with some sort of vision, and do all the things that you think are necessary as few times as possible. Don't re-record it over and over and over again, trying to reach some sort of weird perfection. There is no such thing. Put it out there. Do it. Move on. When I'm mixing something, when I'm listening back and everything feels settled and in a good relationship, and I'm not hearing something being like, oh, that's too loud, that's too bright, that's too quiet, that's got too much reverb, that's got, that doesn't have enough, that's not really sitting in the right space. Once all those types of things have stopped, like sort of raising their hand to me, flagging me, and I can just listen to it and it all feels like it's balanced. And I hear all the parts that I think are important. I like the way everything sounds. I'm done. It's not like, I'm not sitting there thinking like, did I do a good job? Is that the way that should sound? Is it good enough? I mean, obviously, do I have those thoughts? Of course, it's human. You have those thoughts, but talking like, trying to have perspective and execute and finish things, that's the way you need to be. It's just like, when I sit down to mix a song, it's like I listen to the rough mix, have a conversation with the artist, create a vision in my head, understand where they're coming from, what the reference point is, make the mix. And when things stop saying, hey, I'm not loud enough, I'm too loud, then I'm done. And then it's ready to share. And I also know that I'm going to need a little bit of space to kind of listen to it again and sort of have a an opinion about how close I got with that effort, and then also be ready to listen to what other people have to say about it. You know, it's as a painter, you know, we use kind of that was a sort of analogy. I don't get all the paints, you know, it's like I don't get all the paints out that I have in the studio, and fill, you know, and completely fill up every nook and cranny of the painting with stuff. It's like if I'm going to paint a tree, I paint a tree, and you know, I'm not going to paint a forest. I'm going to paint a tree, and then, you know, I'm going to step back, and it's like, well, I painted a tree. It looks like a tree. You know, it's like, I guess I'm done. And now, if I painted a great tree and it speaks to other people, they're going to buy that painting. They're going to talk about that painting. That painting might become famous. If I painted a tree and it really doesn't appeal to anybody, well, I made an attempt at painting the tree. And if I want to paint another tree, at least I have that experience to go on. But because I completed it and I had a feeling of I'm done, I'm separate, it has its own life now, and it's going to either speak to people, a lot of people, or nobody. And that is what it is. And I'm going to make another piece of art. And if I'm going to keep painting trees, well, I'm going to use that as an experience. Or I'm going to keep painting that tree until somehow I paint it the way that it speaks to people. And, you know, I hope that answers it. And listen, I need to go in a minute. I want to just spend a minute here just saying again how appreciative I am of everyone. I hope that this has been a good experience for everyone, that there's a lot to learn. I would encourage you to pick the course back up in a period of time and review certain things and kind of revisit it on your journey. And as you learn more and kind of get deeper into it, you know, maybe there's some information in there that you could return to that you might understand in a different way and help you. And just understand that I'm also still on my own journey. I haven't particularly perfected the craft or my place in it, and, you know, my way of doing things. I'm on a journey myself. I'm still trying to get better at things and expand my own horizons, and just have a good time being creative. To me, that's the best part about it is, you know, I'm not trying to win some popularity contest per se. I'm just trying to engage with creative people and make records, because that's what I love to do, and I'm really thankful for it, and I'm thankful for everybody, and I hope everyone is inspired and has a lot of success, and that you stay on your journey to that success.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this, Jacquire. Thanks for both doing the course and the Q&As as well. I certainly learned a lot. I know everyone else did as well. The comments on the course have just been fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have a recording of the Q&A up hopefully tomorrow with timestamps, and then we'll email those out to everyone.
Fantastic. Just go out there and kill it, you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.